Amara Okafor would never forget that night. The air in Abuja was hot and heavy, and the ceiling fan above her head moved slowly, doing almost nothing to cool the room. She stood in the living room, confused, watching her husband. Chinedu looked different. His face was hard. His eyes were cold. There was no love in them anymore. Without saying a word, he threw a stack of papers onto the glass table in front of her. The sound made her jump. "Sign it," he said flatly. "You're no longer useful to me." For a second, Amara couldn't breathe. Her hands began to shake as she stared at the papers. Divorce papers. The word felt like a knife in her chest. She looked up at him, hoping this was a joke, hoping he would smile and say sorry. But he didn't. This was the same man she had loved for 9 years. The same man she had stood beside when his business failed and he had nothing. She remembered the nights he cried in her arms, the days she used her own money to feed them, the prayers she whispered for his success. She had believed in him when nobody else did. But now he was wearing an expensive suit she had never seen before. A strong, strange perfume filled the air. He looked successful, confident, like he didn't need her anymore. He didn't even look at her with kindness. He looked at her like she was nothing. And in that moment, Amara felt her whole world shatter. Amara's lips trembled as tears filled her eyes. She looked at Chinedu, her voice shaking. "Please, tell me what I did wrong," she begged. "We can fix it. We can talk about it." But he didn't answer. He just stood there, silent, with an annoyed look on his face, like she was wasting his time. That silence hurt more than any words could. Then suddenly Amara heard a soft sound behind him. Footsteps. Her heart stopped. A young woman walked out of their bedroom like she belonged there. She was wearing Amara's silk robe, the same one Amara had bought for herself on her last birthday. The woman's hair was perfect, her lips painted, and her face carried a small, proud smile. It was Zainab Bello. She didn't look embarrassed. She didn't look sorry. She looked victorious. Amara felt like the ground disappeared under her feet. She looked from Zainab to Chinedu, hoping he would deny it, hoping he would explain. But he didn't. Instead, he walked past Amara, grabbed her small travel bag from the corner and threw it onto the table. He opened it and started stuffing her clothes inside carelessly. He didn't fold them. He didn't care. Dresses she loved, clothes full of memories. He pushed them in like they meant nothing. "Chinedu, please stop," she cried. "This is my home too." He turned and looked at her with cold eyes. "Get out of my house," he said. Those words broke something inside her. Before she could even react, he grabbed the bag and pushed it into her hands. Then he held her arm and dragged her toward the door. Amara was crying now, her whole body shaking. "Please, don't do this," she whispered. But he opened the door and pushed her outside. The door slammed shut in her face. Amara stood there in shock. She was barefoot. The cold ground hurt her feet. The night was dark and quiet. She could hear distant cars, dogs barking, and the sound of her own broken breathing. Inside that house was her husband, her life, her memories. But the door stayed closed. Tears ran down her face as she slowly walked away, holding her small bag. In just one night she had lost her marriage, her home, and the man she thought would love her forever. That night, Amara found herself in a cheap roadside lodge in Woods. The small room smelled of dust and old sheets. The yellow bulb above her flickered, making the walls look even more lonely. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, still wearing the same clothes she had been thrown out in. Her feet were dirty. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Everything felt unreal. Just a few hours ago she had been a wife in her home. Now she was alone in a strange room that didn't even feel safe. Her small travel bag sat on the floor in the corner. The same bag Chinedu had thrown at her like she was nothing. Amara kept looking at it, but she couldn't touch it. It scared her. Because opening that bag meant accepting the truth. It meant accepting that she was no longer his wife. That she had no home to go back to. That everything was really over. So she just sat there, hugging herself, crying quietly until no more tears came out. Her chest hurt. Her head hurt. Even breathing felt heavy. At some point she lay down on the bed, but sleep never really came. Morning arrived slowly. The weak sunlight entered through the torn curtain. Amara stared at the ceiling, feeling empty. Then her stomach growled. She hadn't eaten anything since the day before. Reality was no longer waiting. It was here. She slowly sat up and looked at the bag again. Her hands trembled as she reached for it. For a moment she stopped. "What's the point?" she whispered to herself. But she had nothing else. She pulled the bag closer and placed it on the bed. Her fingers moved slowly to the zipper. Her heart was beating fast like she was about to open something dangerous. She took a deep breath, then she unzipped it. Inside were her clothes, thrown in carelessly. Dresses, blouses and a pair of sandals. Seeing them made fresh pain hit her chest, but then she noticed something strange. There was a thick brown envelope at the bottom of the bag. She frowned. She didn't remember putting it there. Her hands froze. Her heart started beating faster. She slowly picked it up. Her name was written on it. Amara Okafor. She stared at it in confusion. This was not just clothes. This was something else. Something Chinedu never meant for her to find. Amara stared at the brown envelope for a long time. Her fingers rested on her name written clearly across the front. Amara Okafor. She knew one thing immediately. This was not Chinedu's handwriting. Her heart started beating faster. She looked at the door of the small lodge room, as if someone might suddenly walk in and take it away from her. Her hands felt cold. Slowly she opened the envelope. Inside were several papers. Official papers. Thick and important. She pulled out the first one. It was a legal document. She frowned, not understanding at first. Her eyes moved slowly across the page. Then she saw her name again. Property owner, Amara Okafor. Her breathing stopped. What? She whispered. Her hands began to shake as she grabbed the next paper. It was a bank statement. The numbers on it were huge. Millions of naira. Her heart was pounding so loudly she could hear it. She quickly picked up another document. It was a property deed. Her eyes widened. It showed the address of the luxury house. The same house. The house she had lived in with Chinedu. The house he had just thrown her out of. He felt dizzy. She read it again. Owner, Amara Okafor. Not Chinedu. Her. The house was in her name. Her mind raced with confusion. How was this possible? Chinedu had always acted like the house belonged to him. He had always called it his house. But the paper said something else. The law said something else. Her hands covered her mouth in shock. Then she noticed one last thing inside the envelope. A folded piece of paper. It looked older than the others. It was a handwritten letter. Her heart beat even faster. She slowly opened it. The moment her eyes saw the name at the bottom, her whole body froze. He couldn't believe it. It was from someone she never expected. Someone who was no longer alive. And suddenly Amara realized, this secret was bigger than Chinedu. Amara's hands trembled as she held the letter. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Soft, careful, familiar. Mama Ngozi. Chinedu's mother. Amara's eyes filled with tears before she even started reading. Mama Ngozi had passed away 3 years ago, but she had always been kind to Amara. She had treated her like a real daughter, not just a daughter-in-law. Amara took a deep breath and began to read. Amara, if you are reading this, it means the time has come for you to know the truth. Her heart started beating faster. I know my son. I love him, but I know his weaknesses. Success can change him. Money can change him. And if one day he forgets your value, I need you to be protected. Amara's vision blurred with tears. He kept reading. Years ago, I used my savings and investments to buy this house and other properties, but I did not put them in his name. I put them in yours. Amara gasped softly. Her hands shook harder. This house belongs to you, Amara. Not him. Never him. Tears rolled down her cheeks now. If he ever betrays you, if he ever forgets the woman who stood beside him when he had nothing, this will protect you. This will make sure you never become homeless. This is my promise to you. The letter ended simply. With love, Mama Ngozi. Amara lowered the paper slowly. Her heart was full of shock. And emotion. And something else. Faith. All this time she had believed the house belonged to Chinedu. All this time she had felt small. Powerless. But the truth was the opposite. The house was hers. Everything was hers. The man who had looked at her and said, "Get out of my house," had been wrong. He didn't even know the truth. He didn't know he had just thrown the real owner out. Amara let out a shaky breath. For the first time since that terrible night, she didn't feel weak. She realized something powerful. Chinedu had not destroyed her life. He had made the biggest mistake of his own. 2 days later, Amara stood in front of the same house she had been thrown out of. But this time she looked different. She didn't look broken. She didn't look weak. Her eyes were calm. Her face was steady. Inside her chest, her heart was beating fast. But it wasn't from fear anymore. It was from confidence. She was no longer coming back as a helpless wife. She was coming back as the owner. She held the brown envelope tightly in her hands and walked toward the door. For a brief second, the painful memories flashed in her mind. The door slamming in her face, her tears, her bare feet on the cold ground. She took a deep breath and knocked. A few seconds later the door opened. Chinedu stood there. He looked surprised for a moment. Then his face changed into a mocking smile. He leaned against the door and laughed. "So," he said with a cold chuckle, "have you come to beg?" Amara didn't answer. She didn't cry. She didn't react. She just looked at him quietly. Behind him she could see Zainab sitting on the sofa, relaxed like she owned the place. Zainab's lips curved into a small, proud smile when she saw Amara. They both thought she was weak. They both thought she had nothing. Amara slowly lifted the brown envelope and held it out to him. Chinedu frowned. "What is this?" he asked. She said nothing. He rolled his eyes and grabbed it carelessly. He opened it, still looking annoyed. But as his eyes moved across the first page, his expression changed. His smile disappeared. His forehead tightened. He looked at the paper again. Then the next one. And the next one. His hands started shaking. His face lost all its color. This is not possible," he whispered. Behind him Zainab stood up. "What is it?" she asked nervously. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the papers like his world was collapsing. Zainab walked closer and looked over his shoulder. Her confident face suddenly filled with fear. The room became silent. The same man who had once looked powerful now looked small. And Amara just stood there, calm and unshaken. Because now, finally, they knew the truth. Amara looked straight into Chinedu's eyes. Her face was calm but her voice was strong. "This is my house," she said quietly. "You need to leave." The words hung in the air. For a moment nobody moved. Chinedu blinked like he didn't understand what he had just heard. Then he laughed nervously. "What nonsense are you saying?" he snapped. "This is my house." Amara didn't react. She simply pointed at the papers still shaking in his hands. "You've read it," she said. "You know the truth." His face turned red with anger. "No. This is a lie," he shouted. "You planned this. You tricked me." Zainab stood behind him, silent now. The confidence she once had was gone. Fear had replaced it. Chinedu stepped closer to Amara, trying to intimidate her. "You can't throw me out," he said angrily. "I live here." Amara didn't step back. Instead she spoke calmly. "The law says I can." Those words hit him harder than anything else. Because deep inside he knew she was right. In the days that followed, everything changed. Amara contacted a lawyer and showed all the documents. The process was fast. The truth was clear. The house legally belonged to her. There was nothing Chinedu could do. A few days later the moment finally came. Chinedu's clothes, his shoes, his bags, and his belongings were placed outside the same front door. The same door he had pushed her out of. He stood there in shock, looking at his things on the ground. The neighbors watched quietly. They remembered the night Amara had walked out crying, barefoot and broken. Now they were watching something else. They were watching his downfall. Zainab was nowhere to be seen. She had disappeared before this day even came. Chinedu looked at Amara standing in the doorway. His eyes were no longer proud. They were desperate. But Amara felt no fear. No weakness. No pain. Only strength. The man who once threw her out like she was nothing was now the one with nowhere to go. After Chinedu left the house, Amara finally began to understand the truth. At first she was confused. How could a man who looked so successful suddenly lose everything? He had expensive clothes. He acted rich. He acted powerful. But slowly the real story came out. One afternoon her lawyer visited her with more information. He explained that Chinedu's business was not successful at all. In fact, it was failing badly. He was drowning in debt. He owed millions of naira to banks, business partners, and other people. Every day the pressure on him was growing. Amara sat quietly listening in shock. All this time he had been pretending. The expensive suits were lies. The confidence was fake. The success was an illusion. He had been desperate. Her lawyer explained something that made everything even clearer. Chinedu had been planning to sell the house. He wanted to use the money to pay his debts and save himself. That was his escape plan. But he didn't know one thing. The house was never his. It was Amara's. His plan was doomed from the beginning. Amara felt a mix of emotions, pain, anger, but also relief. He had not divorced her because she was useless. He had divorced her because of greed. He thought she was standing in his way. He thought he could throw her out, sell the house, and start a new life. But his own betrayal had destroyed everything. And then there was Zainab, the woman he had chosen over his wife. The woman who smiled while Amara was being thrown out. She didn't stay long. The moment Chinedu lost the house, the moment his money disappeared, she disappeared too. No goodbye. No apology. He was just gone. He had never loved him. She had loved his money. Now Chinedu was completely alone. No house. No girlfriend. No success. Nothing. And Amara finally understood something important. His betrayal was never about her. It was about his own selfishness. He was the one who lost everything. Amara could have stayed bitter. She could have let the anger and pain swallow her whole. She could have cried every night thinking about what Chinedu had done. But she didn't. Instead she made a choice to take control of her life. The first thing she did was look at the house that had once been a symbol of her heartbreak. He saw potential. She saw opportunity. Slowly she turned it into a set of rental apartments. Each room was cleaned, painted and renovated. She found tenants, collected rent and finally had a steady income. For the first time in years money came to her. Not because she was supporting someone else but because she was building something of her own. But that wasn't enough. Amar had always loved design. When she was married she had dreamed of starting her own interior design business. She had imagined decorating homes, choosing colors, creating beautiful spaces. But those dreams were always on hold. There was always Chinedu to support, his business to save, his life to fix. Now she had the freedom to follow her passion. She rented a small office in Abuja and started her interior design business. At first it was just a few clients, friends, neighbors, people who had heard her story. But word spread quickly. Her designs were bold, unique and full of life. People loved her work. Orders grew. Soon Amara was hiring a small team. She was running her own business, calling her own shots and watching her vision come to life. More than anything she felt proud. Proud that she had rebuilt her life. Proud that she had turned pain into power. She no longer lived in the shadow of someone else. She was her own person, strong, independent and unstoppable. Every day she reminded herself how far she had come. Every success, every apartment rented, every client impressed, was a victory over the life that Chinedu had tried to steal from her. Amar was no longer just surviving. She was thriving. She was building her own empire one step at a time. And with each step she felt a freedom she had never known before. This was her life, her dreams, her power. And she would never let anyone take it from her again. Months later Amara walked through a busy street in Abuja and saw him. Chinedu. The man who had thrown her out like she was nothing. But he looked different now. Older. Tired. Broken. His shoulders slumped, his eyes searching hers, full of regret. He ran up to her, almost desperate. Amara, please. I was wrong. I'm sorry. Forgive me, he begged, his voice shaking. Amara stopped and looked at him. She felt the memory of that terrible night, the cold streets, the fear and the heartbreak. But she didn't feel anger anymore. She didn't feel the need to punish him. She smiled. A calm, peaceful smile that came from deep inside. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't mean. It was just hers. Without saying a word, she turned and walked away. Her steps were steady, confident. She didn't look back. She didn't need his apology. She didn't need revenge. Because she already had something far greater. She had her freedom. The kind of freedom that no one could take from her. She had her dignity, the respect for herself that Chinedu had tried to destroy. She had her power, the strength to build her own life, her own empire and her own future. And as people watched, they understood something they hadn't realized before. The man who had thrown her away had done exactly what she needed. Without knowing it, he had given her everything back. Her home, her confidence, her independence, her life. And Amara walked on, stronger than ever, leaving behind the shadows of the past, stepping fully into a future that was hers and hers alone. The world didn't just see her survive. They saw her rise. And that rise shocked everyone.